The Good Girl Confessional podcast and WB40, Women Beyond 40, would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the unceded lands on which this podcast and our platform is recorded and researched, the Wurundjeri, Woiwurrung and Bunurong peoples of the Kulin Nations. We pay our deepest respects to their elders, past and present, and we pay homage to their ancient culture of storytelling. Hello, welcome back to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Lowries, and the Good Girl Confessional podcast is, of course, the podcast of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, an award-winning platform for women who are in midlife and beyond, because we know that the stories of women matter and every woman has a story that should be heard. Today in the podcast, I'm very excited because I got to chat with the most lovely person. Her name is Anna Johnston. She has written her debut novel. Here it is. If you're watching along, you'll see it here. The Borrowed Life of Frederick, Fife. This is such a heartwarming, beautiful story about an elderly man who had nothing in his heart except kindness and love, but he was desperately lonely at 82 and broke, and he borrows the life of someone else in a nursing home and basically just takes on his persona. It's beautiful, it's humorous, it's sad, it's lovely, it's adorable. Now, the wonderful thing about Anna Johnston, who wrote this book, is that she walked away from an imminent career in medicine because her beautiful granddad, who was her hero, was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and he went to live in a nursing home. So what did Anna do? Well, she decided that she would go and work in that nursing home so she could spend quality time with her granddad. And what she discovered was that she had an actual passion for aged care. She describes herself as an aspiring octogenarian, which I absolutely love. She's just beautiful. When Anna could no longer, due to an injury, work in aged care, she just started writing about it. This is a beautiful, beautiful book, but it was a glorious and really joyful conversation that I got to have with Anna about the writing process of this, and and a little confession at the end too, that there might be a new book coming. Welcome to the confessional, Anna Johnston.
Hey, how about a podcast about all the music that got us hooked up, knocked up, and broken up? If that got you humming a hit from the 70s and 80s, then have we got a show for you. I'm Jo Pybus, and when Sandy's not in the confessional talking to awesome chicks, she's driving a Sandman over to my place and co-hosting Alex the Seal with me and Molly, a podcast about music nostalgia. Just search for Alex the Seal on your podcast app.
Hi, Anna, and welcome to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. So first of all, I should say congratulations on your new book, which is beautiful to look at and beautiful to read.
Thank you.
The Borrowed Life of Frederick, Fife. Absolutely gorgeous. Tell us about how the book came about and the inspiration behind it.
Well, the book started with the idea of the protagonist, who was actually inspired by my grandfather, who was my best friend. And he was the most endearing, kind, selfless, and honest man you've ever met. And so I wanted to capture some of his nature on the page. And because he was so honest, he found it hard to even play a card game that required bluffing or cheating. So plot stems from conflict. So I began to think, what would happen if you put this kind of a man in a place where he felt desperate enough that he had to deceive if he knew that he wasn't hurting anyone? So it kind of grew from there. And I've always been fascinated by cases of mistaken identity and doppelgangers. So, yeah.
I love it. I think what a gorgeous, gorgeous premise for a book. So we should tell everyone that basically the premise of this beautiful book is that Frederick, your lovely character inspired by your grandfather. We should say this is not a true story, by the way. It's just a character.
Be a bit disturbing if it was.
Imagine that. But he basically he's facing homelessness. He's having a bit of a rough trot, and he basically finds himself in a situation where of mistaken identity and ends up living in a nursing home where he suddenly has a roof over his head and food and shelter and all the rest of it going on. And hence why it is called The Borrowed Life of Frederick, Fife. What a fantastic idea for a book.
Thank you.
And it's all the twists and turns, I guess. Now, I guess
Yes.
I'm really fascinated, though, with your relationship with your grandfather that you shared. And let's talk about your life, because you were studying medicine.
Yes.
And then everything changed. Let's talk about that.
Yeah. So my dad was a wonderful doctor. He's retired now. And I always thought that I would follow in his footsteps. And I studied really hard at school, and I was lucky enough to get into medicine. But when I was kind of nearing the end of my studies, I sort of began to feel that this wasn't for me. So while like my friends and, other students were like really fascinated by cadaver dissection and pharmacology, I was sort of really drawn to the older patients and how many of them were lonely and socially isolated, and the effect that had not only on their mental health, but their physical health as well. And yeah, the more I sort of began to look into it, the more I've just felt drawn to kind of work in this area. And having enjoyed such a close relationship with my own grandparents and even great-grandfather, I felt very at home around older people. And so I ended up transferring into a health promotion degree, which I finished. And then I went on to work for local government, where I developed a cooking program to teach older widowed men how to cook. And that was a lot of fun because not only, I love cooking, and that was great to be able to do that, but just the joy that it gave the men, who then formed friendships. And then also they would have their families over for the Sunday roast that their wife would have normally prepared, but they could kind of have that dignity and that purpose of what they could do. And then my grandfather, Fred, he was diagnosed with dementia and moved into a nursing home. And I saw a job advertised there to be a part of the social support team. And I just felt this is what I'm meant to be doing. And I got the job, and I worked as a social support coordinator there, for the rest of his life. And so that was really special because we got to spend more time together.
I think that's so incredibly beautiful. I think for many of the people who will be listening to this today, many of our listeners are, women who are 40, 50, 60, and we're part of this sandwich generation as well. I think we've been coined
Yes.
aging parents and teenage children or young adults, right? And so I think for a lot of us, this is a reality for so many people we have to face. My father actually had dementia and was in a nursing home up until he passed away. And so I think it's so beautiful that you took on a job at the same nursing home and that you were able to spend that lovely time together. So tell us some of the things that you used to do together.
So we both loved musical theatre, and so we would sing a lot of Pirates of Penzance as I wheeled him down the hall. And he never forgot, the lyrics to words or poems or his loved ones. So we were incredibly lucky in that regard. And he never lost his sense of humour either. So, even though at times he would become quite distressed, there were ways of kind of, drawing him in. And we used to eat lunch together most days as well, which was really amazing. And he was always so grateful for anything, which I guess also comes across in the character of Fred, is that, most people would complain about nursing home food, and he would just be so grateful. And he made everyone around him feel shiny.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And your grandparents had a really lovely relationship from what I've read as well. So
They
tell
did.
us about writing letters.
Yeah, so my grandfather was a wordsmith, and he really, he really inspired me as a writer. He would write, poetry and letters, and even the odd sort of bawdy limerick. um, and he was a master at grammar. Like I mean, I wish I had his grammatical prowess. I don't. But he would write little things for my grandmother Dawn. That were just so beautiful. And he kept doing that up until his early 80s. And when the dementia took away that ability, I sort of became his pen as such. And I would, write things down, and then I would read it to him, and then he would sign it Lizard, which is what her pet name for him was. And sometimes we'd, accompany that with flowers or something so that he could continue loving her in the way that he wanted to.
Oh, that is so beautiful. I think, the character Fred that we've created here, I'm sure, as you said, that you've poured a lot of, he's fictitious, but really the love that you've created around this character seems very real.
Yes.
Seems very real to me. And so tell us about the process of starting to write the book, and, how did the characters sort of form themselves?
Well, yeah, so it started off with Fred and this sort of idea, and as much as I would love to meticulously plot everything, that's not me. I was, as many people were in the last couple of years, as kind of understanding of the condition increases. I was diagnosed with ADHD, and it makes a lot of sense. So I wasn't able to just make a meticulous plan. What I did find really important was really understanding story structure, like having that foundation, putting the main posts in place, and then what they call pantsing, which is, fly by the seat of your pants, discovering things as you go. And there was obviously this is no spoilers, but there were certain things and ways of doing things that I wanted to explore doing on the page. And so, the characters kind of just developed, quite organically.
Yeah, wow. And so tell us about life now. So are you still working in aged care? What are you up to at the moment?
No, so after I had children, I actually had severe pelvic organ prolapse, and I had to have multiple surgeries for that, and I was unable to return to any kind of physical job. So I wanted to be a stay-at-home mum, and I was very lucky to be able to do so. I didn't take that for granted. And so that is what I was doing when I began writing.
Beautiful. Yeah, it is good. And it's really, thank you for sharing that story, because there's so many women go through birth trauma, and it's rarely discussed. It's rarely spoken about. I had a fabulous guest on this podcast actually who wrote a book called The Day My Vagina Broke, and it's exactly it is exactly about birth trauma and the physical effects this had on her life. And
absolutely.
Yeah. And it's such a, it should not be a shameful thing that women, can't talk about it. And unfortunately it is. So
I'm so proactive about talking about it, because I don't want anyone to feel that they can't talk about it.
No, good for you. And I'm really pleased when people sort of raise these things, because, my children are adults now, but I went through birth trauma with the very first one. And I think it's so important to really just get it out there and start talking about it.
Yeah, and normalising it.
Absolutely. And, I suppose it's great too that you had at least, some medical background as well. So you've probably got the tools and the voice to be able to get it out there and express this to doctors.
Yeah.
And that kind of leads me into as well. So your grandfather, when he was diagnosed with dementia, it sparked in you a want and a need to sort of help others as well within the nursing home system. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was already just so invested in this, like in the area of social isolation in older people. And I guess what's surprising to a lot of people is that when people move into a nursing home, you think, oh, well, they'll be with 100 other residents. You know, isolation won't be an issue. But unfortunately, it's not the case for many, many people. So many people go into a nursing home and, the most important thing that they've left behind is not their home or their possessions, but it's often their sense of purpose, their sense of community. That just all goes, and their dignity as well. So suddenly they're having to be reliant on other people for all of these things, and it's a real challenge. And there's a lot of assumptions that happen in aged care about what people are, what older people actually enjoy or are capable of. And so I was really passionate about sort of shaking up those assumptions and, yeah, really exploring, what made people feel connected and what gave them purpose. And for each resident, that's different. It looks different, but finding ways to connect despite their physical health limitations or a dementia diagnosis.
Yeah, that's so important. And I do think, having seen my dad in a nursing home, I think I understand firsthand how lonely it can be for a lot of people. A lot of people do not have visitors. A lot of
Yeah.
people, especially people with dementia, there's an assumption too that they can't have any, there's no happiness, which
Exactly.
is also not true. Yeah, so that's really interesting.
Yeah, there was one gentleman, I'll sort of never forget, that who had dementia, and he loved drawing and he loved animals, but because he could no longer feed himself, people assumed that he could no longer draw. But, when we put a pencil in his hand, he drew the most incredible, picture, and it was just one of the most moving pieces of art I've ever seen.
Wow. And so I guess programs like, and I'm sure, I don't know if you've watched it, but I'm sure you have. I'm trying to think what it's called, but there's a television show where they put like 4-year-olds,
Yes.
kindergarten kids, and they actually put them in a nursing home and team them up with elderly people. And it's the most wholesome, beautiful thing. I think if anyone has a chance to watch it, they should.
Yes.
But it's so lovely. But it really does break down those barriers, I think,
Absolutely.
of understanding that people are a certain way because they feel isolated and they feel a bit forgotten and they feel a bit alone. I think it's such a joyful show that proved that the kids were encouraging them, like, come on, let's go outside and play. And some of them were like, oh, I haven't done this in years.
Yes. And kids often don't make the assumptions that grown-ups do. And they're curious, like they'll ask questions that we might be too afraid to. And it's a beautiful show.
It really is. Yeah, I think it's called 4-year-olds for, what is it called? 4-year-olds.
People's Home for 4-year-olds, is it?
That's right. Old
Yeah.
People's Home for 4-year-olds. It's just divine.
I hope we see more of that.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful program. And it'd be really nice to see that implemented in lots of nursing homes and retirement villages.
Yes.
I think it's so great. And what are the types of things do you think that you saw in your time that kind of, I guess, bled into the book as well? But what are the types of things that you think are really helpful to aging people in nursing homes and retirement villages?
I think having a sense of community, and like something that I would love to see that is happening a little bit here. There are a couple of places doing it in Australia, but it sort of started overseas. Is they have dementia villages. So I'm not sure if you've heard of those, but it's actually like a village where people can walk around safely. They can go to shops, and it doesn't matter if they have the correct money or even any money. It kind of like gives them a much broader, home in which to exist. But the thing that I really love about it is in some of these places, they let people from the normal community, even if you have no relatives there, they can come and eat at the restaurants there. They can come and watch a film at the cinema there. And therefore it normalises it. it's like, it's not this big scary thing where people are, sort of locked away almost in some scenarios, but it's this normalizing because, as we have the aging population, we're going to see more and more of this. And a lot of people have just not had, unless you have a loved one with dementia, if you don't, then you may not have any experience with it at all, and you don't see it out and about because everyone is away in these nursing homes that you wouldn't, and a lot of, obviously, the dementia wards are often locked. And so, so I think having that exposure and having, the community be a part of their lives, I would love to see more and more of that happening. And it's exciting, there are a couple of these places popping up around Australia, and I sort of see that as the future would be wonderful.
I think it's lovely. And I was reading recently that there are restaurants in Japan and all of the waiters, all the wait staff have dementia, but and everyone comes to dine at these restaurants knowing that they may or may not get the right order, knowing that the food might get delivered or it might not.
Yes.
But it's so beautiful, and it's a really gorgeous way to give like the wait staff so much dignity.
Absolutely.
And they feel purposeful, and they get really excited about going to work. But, I don't know that any money changes hands. I don't know if they get paid or anything, but I think it's just it's a lovely way to connect people with dementia to the community.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I'd love to see something like that crop up here too.
Yes.
I think one of the other things that I was reading about too is, social isolation. Obviously you're very pro-aging, which I think is fabulous. And social isolation for people with and without dementia can be really, really damaging, especially as we get older. And so I love these sort of programs. I think in the UK, because of the housing shortages and the cost of living, they have these fantastic programs in place where university students can live with elderly people and they just become housemates.
Yes.
They basically share space.
It's great.
I think it's so fantastic. And I think the benefits of that are so great. What do you think about those sort of programs?
I think it's fantastic. Again, anything that, because as people in society, we go out down the street, we see people of all ages, we interact with people of all ages. And I think that should be the same when you age, and that's why the old people's home for 4-year-olds or the programs that you're talking about, it's that intergenerational community. And that's what you've been used to your whole life. So suddenly, just because you're old and you need to live in a nursing home, it shouldn't mean that you never see uni students again or that you never see 4-year-olds again if you don't have grandchildren or you don't have, family around. So I think the more of that we can see, the better.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think what was really fascinating to me about that program in particular of having university students being roommates with elderly people is that the university students actually said in their feedback that they were getting as much out of this as their housemate.
Yeah.
Yep. So for a lot of them, they're away from family for the first time. A lot of them didn't have grandparents or their grandparents had passed away.
Yes.
So it was this kind of really lovely way to feel connected, but also they were being really well taken care of. And then in return, they wanted to really take care of their new housemates as well, which I think is so lovely.
It's beautiful. It's really great.
It is. And I love, you touched on it before, that you were teaching older people, men in particular, how to cook and how to cook for their families. Do you feel that that's kind of really important as well in terms of them feeling like they have purpose and feeling like that they have a goal?
Definitely. Yeah. I think at any age, having that purpose, I think purpose often gives dignity. And also having that, being independent is a huge thing. So these men were receiving Meals on Wheels. And then after the program, we saw a decrease in Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but the people that were capable of cooking but had just never learnt because, men of that generation, it was typical for the woman to have done the cooking, and then when she passed away, you know, they would be surviving on toast and things like that, or Meals on Wheels. And so just giving them back that the independence was a huge thing, and then from that trickles on, you know, all the social aspects of it, which is great.
Yeah, and just the knock-on effect too, that once you learn how to cook, then you start going back to the supermarket.
Exactly.
For example, right?
Exactly.
You do your own grocery shopping.
Yeah, you ask someone over for a meal, and which you wouldn't probably do if you had Meals on Wheels necessarily.
Yeah, very, very true. And so what was your family's reaction, by the way, to your book? Tell us about that.
So not all of them have. I've been like, my parents have read it, like a very early draft, my husband and that, but not all of my family have read it yet. But my parents were very, very proud, and they, I think they could definitely see the little glimpses of my grandfather and my grandmother in there. As you say, like the characters are fictional, the plot is fictional, but the love is very real. I think, you know, I say to people, I really feel like somehow my grandparents' love got into the keyboard and onto the page as I was writing. So
I loved too that you used a lot of humour.
Yeah.
There is a lot of humour in this book. Tell me about that, because I almost feel like it's a coping mechanism. You know, that there's some, you know, you're writing about things that are really difficult. They are difficult things when you're talking about dementia and nursing homes.
Yeah.
And but you've used a lot of humour, I think, to express this.
Yeah. So it's very much me on a plate. Like, I'm anyone that meets me, like I'm, you know, 50% humour, 50% sentimentality, 20% drama, and I don't have good math skills, but So for me, humour, like, it's such a huge part of who I am. It was a part of my grandfather. But I think, like, I always think of, you know, that phrase, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
Yeah.
But lemonade needs sugar, and, you know, humour is that sugar. So it kind of makes the unbearable bearable. And I think having a good laugh is also really cathartic. So, you know, there are people that, you know, have been touched by these issues, and the book does really touch on a lot of very heartbreaking issues. And I think for me it was really important to balance that. But it's also a way to bring these things up as well in some cases. So
Yeah, very true. Very true. And look, the reality is for all of us is that no one is ever going to stay the same age. We all age.
That's right.
So tell us about your pro-aging stance, I guess, and why you think that this is really important.
Well, I mean, I'll be the first to confess that it's a journey for me as well. And like, I am very pro-aging and very, I just, you know, I love older people and I want to normalize aging. At the same time, I have to say that in this day and age, with like all the photo editing apps and all the social media filters and everything, it is very, very hard to not get sucked down that rabbit hole. And at times I have felt myself being sucked down that rabbit hole, and I have to pull myself back, because I think, well, this is actually not a world that I want for my daughters. And so, you know, making the decision to not, you know, to not always filter things or to do things and to normalize things. And, you know, even getting author photos was it's nerve-wracking, because you're like, I'm going to be public. And my photographer was actually a beautiful influence on me, like when I was going down that rabbit hole, and just really trying to hold myself accountable, like, you know, put your money where your mouth is. But it is very hard in this day and age to be pro-aging and to, you know, like, I'm quite against the term anti-aging. And when it says like anti-aging moisturizer comes on the TV, like, it's just, it instantly paints it as a bad thing. And, you know, even the phrase, you know, oh, you don't look 50 at all. You don't look 40. You don't look 60. That implies that being 60 or 40 or 80 is a bad thing. Like, it's youth is constantly used as a compliment. And I'd like to see a reversal in that. Like it's such a common phrase. Oh, you don't look anything like your age. You look so much younger. But I'm hoping we can start changing the conversation, because there's no one way to look 80 or 60 or 40 or whatever the age is.
Look, you're preaching to the converted here.
Yeah.
I started my platform, Women Beyond 40, and this podcast exactly for that reason, meeting so many extraordinary women, 40, 50s, 60s, 70s. I've had guests on here in the 80s who are amazing. And in fact, one of my dear friends, Lisa, who will no doubt be listening along, is in her 80s, and she's absolutely one of the most fabulous women I've ever met in my life. She's brilliant. And I think I just got really tired of these extraordinary women feeling like they were being judged for their age. They felt often invisible. They felt like they were being overlooked by mainstream media. They felt a lot of things. And yet all women have stories within us, and all women have wisdom that we can share.
Yes.
And I really, really am passionate about that as well, about breaking down those barriers.
Absolutely.
And saying, well, there is no one way to age or to look at a certain age, or how, women should have the right to dress how they want to dress regardless of their age,
Absolutely.
So I think it's so important. And you're right. I think that we are starting to see minor shifts. We're starting to see some brands calling things pro-age rather than anti-age.
Yes.
But you're right. We are, as women especially, like men as well, but as women especially, we are inundated with this constant messaging of we shouldn't have wrinkles regardless of our age. Yeah. We shouldn't have grey hair. We shouldn't. And we all are indoctrinated. We just are, just to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But you're right. I think it's fascinating to live in an age where the greatest act of defiance is to actually show your age.
Yes. Yep. Absolutely. It's very hard. And it's, when you can de-wrinkle yourself in one click, it's it's a whole new area to try and, a whole new area of challenges.
You're right. And I do feel for younger generations that's the thing.
So do I.
I have children, and I think they've been, my youngest two are, the first generation to have grown up with social media completely. Like, it's never not been in their lives, if you like, in one way or another. And, it's prevalent everywhere they turn around now. And there's so many apps, and there's Snapchat and there's all sorts of things. And you're right, everything's about filters. Everything's about looking like and living your life as if you're an Instagram influencer.
Yes.
It's difficult.
It's really hard to fight against. And it's so easy to just you're taking little steps, but then suddenly you're like, oh, hang on, this is just not me at all. And I just got to, it is hard.
It is hard. But it's really heartening, I think, to start seeing, it's great when we see ordinary people do it, but it's important that we see celebrities, I think, because they have a platform and a voice.
Yes.
That we're starting to see a lot of actresses, a lot of actors who are actually saying, well, I've got grey hair and I have wrinkles and this is who I am. And I don't know that they thought they were going to be trailblazers, but they are.
They are, That's so true.
Yeah, and seeing people like, Pamela Anderson, for example, turning up on the red carpet with no makeup and going, well, too bad, this is who I am. Lots of actresses now who have gorgeous silver hair and they look divine.
Yes.
Right, which is amazing. I think Andy McDowell is such an inspiration for that reason, going, well, no, this is who I am.
Yes.
And that's how it is. I think that highlights too, we're talking about social media, but we are living in a country, like a lot of countries, which has an aging population. I mean, that is our reality. And do you think social media creates more social isolation for older people or less? It's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. I can see it going both ways. So when I was in the nursing home, we did, because of residents' interests, teach a social media class, and we had a gorgeous gentleman who was really, really into it. We set him up with a Facebook account, and he connected with his grandchildren, and they thought he was so cool. Like, how did you do this? Because this was sort of before it was common for older people to have iPads and things like that. And so that was great, and that connected him in that way. I also, though, think that you know, with an iPad in your room, the temptation is to not look outside of that, I can imagine people being online in their room and thinking, well, that's enough. I don't need to go out, you know what I mean, into the outside world to connect because I've got, this here. So, yeah, I think it could go both ways. I think it can be used for good, but it also is that trap of, no matter what age we are, it's very easy to just like do everything online. Oh, I don't have to go out or do this or see that person because I'll just do it online. So, yeah. But obviously, things like FaceTime and that are great for connecting with people. And yeah.
I think so too. I think you've hit the nail on the head. I see it being a little bit of a double-edged sword. I see in some ways, I think it opens up the world to so many people. And we found that out, let's face it, during COVID, to be able to talk to people, to be able to video chat and see people's faces.
Godsend,
And such a godsend. But you're right. It also can encourage you to just sit in the lounge room and do very little else.
Yes.
So
just play the online games for Candy Crush for 8 hours a day.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Fall down the rabbit hole of TikTok or whatever.
Yeah.
I think, and obviously because of the platform that I have, but I'm loving seeing like a lot of older people turning up on TikTok.
Yes.
And I'm just absolutely loving their zest for life, and they're an inspiration to me. That's for sure.
we need those people. We need people.
Yeah, we really, really do. You touched a little bit before about being diagnosed with ADHD.
Yeah.
And how did you like, if you don't mind,
no,
you don't
not at all. Happy to talk about it.
But, yeah. So how did you first come to be diagnosed? And did you find it's actually really helpful in terms of being a writer?
I became diagnosed when I started to understand more about what it looked like in women. So I, was one of the many people who just, when you think ADHD, you think of the hyperactive, naughty, often boy in class who can't sit still. I think I was able to get into medicine. So how could I have ADHD? Like a lot of women that have, perhaps succeeded academically, it often just gets missed. And so, but the more I understood about it, the more I thought, that is me, that is me, that is me. With certain things like the impulsivity and the disorganization in certain areas, all of that. So, I went to a psychologist and got my diagnosis. I think it's, it is really helpful to know. And it's also a process to move through it and to think, okay, well, what does this mean? And what does this, mean for my future? And also looking back, looking at how did it affect me? Would it have helped me to have known earlier? And the second part of your question was, is it helpful as a writer?
Yeah.
So I think in some ways, yes, and in some ways, no. My husband said the other day, I said to him, sometimes I feel like, I'm a little bit mad and that's why I can write. And he said, I'm mad too. I just don't have as much to show for it. So that saying that, so it does, I think, bring a lot of creativity for me. Who knows which things are from what, but certainly, the creativity. And sometimes I can hyper focus and I've done a 12-hour editing stint before, which was amazing. Other times it's really hard to sit at the computer and to write. So I've sort of had to find really creative ways of, structuring my day. But I also, want to say to the women out there with ADHD or think they might, don't let it stop you. You can still follow your dreams and you can do this, because I think, for me, that was a constant question in my mind. Well, can I do this? Can I write this book? Can I see it through? And yes, you can. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I love that. And, there, as you say, there's so many women now getting diagnosed, and it's because women have been misdiagnosed for for years and
Exactly.
years and years. And there is still, I've talked a lot about this on this podcast with many different women. This horrendousness that goes on, that women have to really advocate for themselves.
Yes. Yes.
With any medical, whether it's psychological or physical. And that, I would say to women, if you're out there and you think maybe you do, I'm not sure what your advice would be, but I would say keep going until you find a doctor who will actually listen.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
First step. Yeah. But I've got a couple of friends who've been diagnosed, and I will say that one of them says it's her absolute superpower. And in finding out, in being diagnosed, she actually said, she suddenly understood herself so much better, and actually just went, and that's why I've always done this, or that's why I do that.
Yes. And there's definitely like wonderful things, and there's definitely, challenging things, but even knowing why you find the challenging things so challenging is a great insight to have.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. And that makes me think about too, like when you were working in nursing homes, I was thinking, imagine how many of our grandparents might have had ADHD and never diagnosed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Which would explain a lot too. So.
And even our parents' generation is,
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, a lot of women are, as I said, misdiagnosed with many, many things.
Yes.
And interesting. I absolutely love this book.
Oh, thank you.
The Borrowed Life of Frederick, Fife. It is so warm and so lovely, and the humour is beautiful. And in talking to you today, I can see so much of you now, I guess, in the book as well. And I think it's absolutely lovely. I hope everyone runs out, buys this book and reads it. It's really quite lovely. And you say, I guess everyone needs a little bit of Frederick in their lives.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's so beautiful, the relationship you had with your own granddad, and that you were able to share such a beautiful, beautiful part of his life with him. And if we can all hope that we all have something like that in our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I was very, very privileged.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Anna, thank you so much for joining me today and talking about your beautiful book and sharing your beautiful stories.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure to be here. Thank you for the wonderful work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. We will share the links to in our show notes with everyone on where they can actually get a copy, or where they can go out and buy this beautiful book. It is really lovely. Congratulations. In terms of more books, will there be more to come?
Yes, I'm already I'm contracted for my second book, so that's already in the works. Just working on that at the moment. So that'll hopefully be released next year.
Oh, how exciting.
Yes.
And can you give us a little hint what it might be about?
Sure. Well, it's about a retired Michelin star chef who is now in a nursing home, grumpy and depressed. He has a death menu of ways in which he thinks he's going to take his own life, but he does not wish for his last meal to be the flavourless mush that they serve. And so he breaks into the nursing home kitchen and cooks himself a meal, which sparks this newfound joy. And, part of that story was influenced by the amazing work Maggie Beer is doing in nursing homes. So, it's a fun one to write, because I get to taste like all this food and just call it research, like these Michelin star things. So, it's good.
Oh, that's a tough gig, Anna.
Yeah, it's so hard. It's so hard.
Oh, I'm super excited. I can't wait.
Yeah.
Wow. I can't wait for that to come out. And hopefully you'll join us back here when the new book comes out. We'd love to hear all about it.
That'd be amazing.
Thank you so much, Anna.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks so so much for listening along to the Good Girl Confessional podcast. I'm really thrilled and excited that the Good Girl Confessional podcast is part of the WB40 Women Beyond 40 platform, a platform we created for women 40, 50, 60 and beyond to share their hard-won wisdom and to learn more information about the things that matter to us as women, midlife and beyond. Now, wherever you're listening to this podcast, I would be hugely grateful if you can follow, like and subscribe, because it helps the algorithm to actually reach more like-minded women. And they will realise that they're not alone in their journey, that's for sure. You might also like to know that we're over on YouTube. Join us there, The Good Girl Confessional. We're also on Instagram and Facebook as both The Good Girl Confessional and Women Beyond 40. And we're over on TikTok under Women Beyond 40. I would also like to thank the editor and producer of the podcast, Michael Smedley. As always, what a brilliant person. And thank you so much for listening along. I love you. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you soon.